What's up guys? Welcome back to another video. We're here back in the garage to do a little bit of work on the Z. Sorry in advance if my voice sounds a little weird. I've been kind of under the weather the last week or so, but we've got work to do. But before we jump in, I thought I'd give you a little bit of a backstory. So if you watched the video when I was driving at my own competition, Drift Roulette High Stakes, you'll know the Z had too much grip in it. And that's because I put grip into the chassis. I made some adjustments to my sway bar, made some adjustments to the shocks, all to add more grip to the car. Now I did that because I had plans of adding power to the car, and I never got around to doing that. But I've got a couple of simple, easy mods, and I was planning on getting a tune all before that event. None of it ever happened, so I thought I would take some time today and at least dive into one of the mods. We're gonna start doing a couple little things here and there and eventually get this thing tuned. And I thought, why not take you guys along for the ride? So what we are going to be working on today is actually a lightweight crank pulley. Now, I've read quite a few things. It's kind of up for debate whether these actually do anything or not, or if it just kind of feels like a little bit more response, because, I mean, in theory, it should be, right? You're taking weight off the rotating mass of the engine. In this case, it's off the very front, and it's a pretty inexpensive mod, so I figured, why not? It came of recommendation from the guy who's going to be tuning this thing, and I thought, if he's had good luck with it, why don't I give it a shot? So this is the lightweight crank pulley kit from Z1 Motorsports. As you can see, it looks fantastic. It also comes with a belt for the AC as well as the power steering and alternator, and it comes with a little spacer that you'll see why we need that in just a bit. As you can see there, it's a real nice kit from Z1 Motorsports, and it comes with pretty much everything you need. New belts, a spacer, and of course the lightweight aluminum pulley. Now they say this pulley weighs 2 pounds. The factory weighs 6 and change, so you're saving over 4 pounds of rotational mass off the front of the motor. Again, in theory, it should make a difference. But let's get this thing swapped out and see if it actually does. Alright, so step one, probably the hardest step, and that's getting the factory crank pulley off. The first part of that is going to be getting the belts off. Now, I have it easy. I don't have AC in this car, so that's one less belt I have to worry about. These only have 2 belts, one for AC and one for power steering and alternator. So I'm going to loosen up the tensioner for the power steering and alternator belt, yank that belt off, and then we should have good access to the crank pulley. Now this would be way easier if I took the whole front end of the car off. Obviously you can remove the radiator support, the radiator, all that. It would make it easier, but it's way more work. I'm not going to do that. You can do this without removing any of that. So you can see there's the crank pulley there. There is the one belt I mentioned that runs the power steering and the alternator down there. And that pulley right down there, this guy, if you can see that, that's the one we've got to loosen. That's the tensioner pulley. And if I'm being honest, it was probably time for this belt to get replaced anyways. You can see it's got a lot of like wear in it. Alright, as you can see behind me, I've got the front of the car up in the air on jack stands. Now this is the easiest way I've found to get to this tensioner here, so I'm going to hop onto the car and show you guys how to get to it so we can get that belt off. Alright, so we're under the passenger side front of the car. You can see this is the crank pulley here. This is what we're trying to take off. This is the tensioner pulley. So you'll have to loosen up the bolt on the front. It's either 12 or 14, I don't remember off the top of my head. And then there is a bolt right here. And now you can see that. So this guy here, this is what actually adds or reduces tension on the belt. But you can't loosen or tighten that one until you loosen this one on the front, because that's what locks it in. So we'll loosen that one up, loosen this one up, and you'll see the pulley kind of come down. That'll relieve tension off the belt. Then we can yank the belt off and move forward. This would be the same process if you were just replacing the belt, or maybe replacing the alternator or the power steering or anything else like that. That's the only way you'll be able to get this belt off, is through this tensioner here. All right, so as you can see, we got the belt off. Now you can tell I didn't take that bolt off the front of the pulley. I just loosened it, and then the one underneath you loosen as well. That one there, and that gives you what you need so that the pulley will be loose. So you can see I can move it up and down now. That's all I needed to get the belt off. Alright, so we got the belt off. That's the easy part of the job. Like I had said in the beginning, the hardest part is going to be getting this crank pulley off. Now, the proper way to do this is with a pretty expensive flywheel tool. It's something that you wedge like in where the transmission is, and it'll hold the flywheel in place. That way you can break this loose, because if you just put a breaker bar on the crank pulley bolt, it just turns the motor. I'm going to show you a way to do it that works most of the time. I got to warn you, if you live in the Northeast or somewhere that gets a lot of rain, a lot of snow, and you tend to have rusty cars, this might not work. It could be seized and it could be a pain, but I live in California, so I'm fingers crossed this isn't going to be a big deal. So the crank pulley bolt is a 19. I've already got a breaker bar sitting on there. I'm going to put the car in 6th gear, and I'm going to pull the handbrake as hard as I can, and then I'm just going to get under there and put a bunch of weight on that breaker bar and hope that it breaks loose. Got it. Easy as that. Now, like I said, if you're not fortunate like me and live in a dry state, that could be seized on, could be rusted on, it could be a real pain. That honestly did take a lot of effort. I mean, you saw I had my foot on the breaker bar. But even that, like if you got the breaker bar into a better position, you could put a jack handle on it and really get some real force on it. It was tough, but it wasn't hard. It took maybe 2 minutes of work. So give that a shot before you go spend a bunch of money on a fancy tool. Like I said, I just threw it in 6th, pulled the parking brake as hard as I could, and it worked just fine. Now we have the task of actually getting the crank pulley off the motor. Again, fingers crossed nothing seized, hoping I can just get a pry bar in there and kind of get some force around the pulley itself, and it should pop off. They do make tools for this, like a pulley removal thing. It's like a little pronged puller. I might actually have one now that I mention it, so maybe I'll dig around for that. Otherwise, like I said, the pry bar method should work too. Just like that, I've got the old factory crank pulley off. This really took like no effort. I put a pry bar underneath the front of it. Put just a tiny bit of effort prying it up. If you are going to use the pry bar method, I'm warning you, don't put a lot of force on it, especially in one spot. I kind of just wiggled it back and forth in one spot, went to the opposite side, wiggled it back and forth. That was enough just to break it loose. Then I could put my hand on it and kind of walk it off the front of the crank. Came right off, super easy. So now we're ready to pop the new aluminum one on. But before we do, I want to weigh this and see if their claims are actually correct.
All right, so we've got my scale out here. Ignore the foil, that's just to keep any nasty oil and stuff off here. So let's see what this thing weighs. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. Pretty much what the internet said. Now for the Z1 Motorsports aluminum one. 1 pound, 15 ounces. So just about 2 pounds, which again is what they said. That's a pretty considerable difference there.
With over 4 pounds off the front of this thing spinning around at 6,000 or 7,000 RPMs, it's got to make a difference, right? That's what I'm thinking. Let's get that new pulley slapped on and see if it actually does. All right, so the next part of this kit, I gotta be honest, when I first got it, I didn't even realize that it had this piece to it, but I'm really excited that it does, because it just means I get to take more weight out of this car and more weight of rotating mass off the front of the engine. So it came with this little OEM Nissan part spacer thing, and I was like, what does this do? Where does this go? And it had mentioned it was a pulley delete spacer or idler delete, something along those lines. Well, I finally looked into it and figured out exactly what it does. So let me show you. So the factory belt routing obviously goes from the crank pulley, alternator, power steering. It's got the tensioner that you saw us loosen up, and then it has this idler pulley. This is just extra pulley for the belt. We're going to be deleting this. So this little spacer, there's the part number there, goes in between the power steering pump and the front of the motor, and the spacer is going to replace this chunk of aluminum here, which is where this big guy is. So we're going to be taking this off, deleting it entirely. The spacer will take up the space there. Oops, we lost our light. And then we'll be able to get the new belt on. I'm going to get a charged up flashlight so I can keep you guys in there to show you what I'm doing. Yeah, like I said, I didn't even know that this was part of the kit, but I think it's really cool that it's going to delete an extra pulley, which means there is less rolling or moving, rotating resistance, whatever you want to call it. So again, small little increments of more power gains or more response or whatever you want to call it. All positive stuff.
There we go. Got that guy off. Pulley's on the ground there. Now we take our little spacer here and we've got to wedge it in between the power steering pump bracket and the front of the engine there. So I'm gonna do my best to kind of wedge this in here. After a whole lot of finagling, you can see we got the spacer in there and now I've got the bolt in there, so just a matter of tightening that down. I had to loosen up some of the other bolts connecting all of that. Tighten that up, then we can get the crank pulley on and get the belt on.
All right, so we got that extra pulley off. I gotta say the front of the motor definitely looks cleaner without that. I mean, check it out. Now, of course, it looks cleaner because there's no crank pulley on there either, so still gotta get that on. But I figured for the sake of science, I'm gonna throw this other pulley on the scale and see how much weight we removed from that. Now, technically, this isn't rotating mass. I mean, I guess it is because it was an idler pulley, but not really. I don't know. At this point, I'm just looking at this as regular weight reduction, so I know it's not much, but if you guys have been following for a while, you know I love weighing all the little random bits that I've taken out of this car over the years, so let's check that on the scale and see what we lost. 2 pounds, 10.8 ounces. Not much, but it's something. One less thing on this car that I don't need. Now, let's quit messing around and get this crank pulley on. All right, some advice for getting the crank pulley on. Take your time to line up the dowel. Once you get it lined up, you can pop the bolt in and then just use a 19 on a ratchet and just slowly work it on. It goes on nice and smooth. It just took me a while to line that dowel up. I was trying to do it from underneath the car because there's more access there, but you really can't see much, and the way the crank was oriented, the dowel was up at the top. So I ended up getting it from the top, lining it up just right, and then like I said, I just put the crank pulley bolt in there and then just worked it on with a ratchet. Now, if you're using a ratchet, pay attention. There should not be any resistance. It should just kind of be tightening up, and you should see the crank pulley just kind of walk onto the crank nice and smooth. If you're feeling a lot of resistance, odds are you didn't line up that dowel well. So take your time, make sure that's good, and it should go on nice and smooth. That being said, I've got mine on. Everything lines up good. It looks great. Take a peek down there. We can see the new crank pulley. And if you kind of look at it here, you can line it up with the power steering pulley, crank pulley there, and see that it's nice and in line. If it was more like that, right, if one stuck out further than the other, then you would know maybe the crank pulley didn't go on all the way or something like that. So definitely double check that before you button everything up. With that done, all that's left is to toss the new belt on. Again, thankfully, this Z1 Motorsports kit came with brand new belts, came with one for the air conditioning and for the power steering. Obviously, I won't be using that one because we don't have AC on this car. So let's get this one on the power steering and alternator, and then we should be good. Not sure if this will be of any use, but I thought I would give you guys the part number. This is for the belt here. Again, not sure if that part number will help. I don't know if it can be cross-referenced with aftermarket brands or factory Nissan belts or whatever, because again, that's the Z1 belt. But the belt length is different now that we got rid of that additional idler pulley, so keep that in mind. You won't be able to reuse your original belt if you're deleting that pulley.
All right, we've got the belt on. Now remember, you want to tighten the tensioner, the actual screw from underneath, the one that puts tension on this. You want to tighten that before we tighten this pulley. So I've got the belt under good tension here, nice and tight, not too tight. And now we're going to go ahead and tighten up this pulley here, and that will lock all this down.
All right, with the pulley on, the belt on, everything tightened down and good, all that I have left to do is torque down that crank pulley bolt. I'm going to do it exactly the way that I got it off. The car is still in 6 with the parking brake all the way up. I'm just going to go down there and put a bunch of force on it. If I had a big torque wrench, I would torque it to spec, but let's be honest, this thing is just really tight, so I'm just going to put it back to a really tight, and it'll be fine. All right, Z's back together. Everything's nice and tight. All that's left now is to fire it up, take it for a quick spin, and see if there was any difference. Unfortunately, it is pretty late on a Sunday night, so that's going to have to wait till tomorrow after work. I'll catch up with you guys then. All right, we're back. Finally got some time. Let's fire this thing up and make sure everything's good. It all works the way it should, and then we'll get this thing out on the road and see, did this pulley actually make any kind of noticeable difference? All right, well, everything sounds good. Everything looks good. Seems like it's running great. Get some heat in this thing. I want to do some free revs. A lot of people that bought this left reviews saying that the car revs a bit more free. So we'll do that, and then we'll get out on the road and see if it feels any more responsive. All right, so we got this thing out on the road, got some heat in it. I'm gonna give you guys some free revs. We'll see if there's any kind of difference at all, and then we'll take it for a spin. Not sure if there's a big difference there. This car kind of feels good no matter what, but I'm gonna throw you guys on the GoPro, and then we will see if there's any kind of difference in driving. All right, so we're at a stop here. We'll just kind of do a little 1, 2, 3. Now again, this is all subjective to just what I feel, but maybe a tiny bit more responsive. I think the more noticeable difference is going to be in like actual throttle response. So we'll get it up to like 3,000-4,000 RPMs, and I'm just going to let off and then stab the throttle again and see if there's a difference there. Alright, well, car survived. Everything seemed to work fine. It feels pretty good. Did you guys like that in-car footage? Let me show you how I captured that, because I was trying to replicate the helmet cam view that I have at the track, but obviously I'm not going to wear a helmet on the street. I don't think I've showed this in video before. If I have, it was a really long time ago. So let me show you how I got that in case you want to get some in-car footage of yourself driving around on the street. This is an old, cheap pair of like ear protection. I removed the padding, drilled some holes so I could still hear through it, and then put a GoPro mount on it. Okay, but I know you didn't come here to get tips on how to film in-car footage, although I do think that setup works really well and it costs like $8. So, did the pulley make any difference? Yeah, I would say it did. The most noticeable difference is like on and off throttle. It's not so much like the immediate throttle response, but it's more so like if you're full throttle and then you lift and then you get back into full throttle, it kind of just has a little bit quicker snap. I wouldn't say it was a tremendous difference. I don't think you're going to see huge gains out of it or really feel anything drastic. But it's there. It's small and it's noticeable. And at the end of the day, this thing costs, I think, like $150 or maybe $175. So it's like under $200. A little bit of a noticeable difference. I think it's worth it. And it looks cool, and it kind of dresses up the front of the motor. It gets rid of some unnecessary stuff. Now, we'll have to see the longevity of it. There is a debate whether removing the factory pulley because it has a rubber damper built into it, if that will cause extra wear and tear down the road. So we'll have to see if that's the case. At the end of the day, I'm not planning on running a VQ for years to come, so as long as this thing lasts for maybe next season, I think it'll be fine. But I thought I'd throw that out there anyways. So let me know what you guys think. Is this something you'd consider doing to your car, or have you done it to your car? If so, what was your experiences? Like I said, I think for the price, it's pretty much worth it. I mean, it's kind of hard to find something else that's like sub $200 that makes any kind of difference, but again, to each their own. Regardless, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Make sure you're subscribed, because there are a handful more of mods I'm going to be doing to this Z over the next month or so. And like I said, we're going to get it tuned, and that is all to make it a little bit more competitive so we can start getting into a bit more serious events come 2024. So stay tuned for all of that. But until then, I will catch you guys in the next one.